Hey, hi, hello. Welcome to Diana Everson. Today we're listening to Secrets of the Morgue, and this is Married to Murder. He told him that she had run off.
He looks over and he sees a skull on the ground. Nothing really adds up. We got all these other women that he's involved with, well, they're all dead. This guy is a killing machine.
Every murder is a mystery. But a victim's body is a sea of evidence. Every fiber is a clue. Every wound, a piece of the puzzle. The medical examiner holds the key to unlock their stories and catch a killer. This is Secrets of the Morgue.
Well, Arlington, Texas is located directly in the middle of Dallas and Fort Worth.
Families love being here because Arlington's known to be safe.
There is crime in Arlington, but it's on a much, much lower scale.
On a quiet Wednesday night, Detective Evans receives a tip, one that will pull police into a decades-old mystery.
I was a detective in the juvenile division of the Arlington Police Department, and I was assigned for a month to work missing persons cases because the regular detective was off. A call comes in to the police department from some subjects that were concerned about Emelita Reeves.
Her worried friends report that they have not seen or heard from her since the morning of October 11th.
Emelita was a Filipino girl. She married Jack Reeves in 1987. He moved her to Texas with the promise of a better life, and no one seemed to know what happened to her.
So we dispatch a couple of our patrol officers over to the location to check it out. They go to the front door and meet Jack Reeves. They told him while they were there, they were checking on Emelita Reeves. Jack was very apprehensive and talking with the officers. They had a small child, and he had the child up there with him by the door. He exclaims, "Yes, Emelita's gone. I believe she's with a lover of hers. She does this all the time, and everything's fine."
He told them he was very angry that she was having a relationship with someone else.
But for Detective Evans, this is not case closed. His first step is getting more information.
Emelita had friends in Arlington that she had been having regular contact with.
When Emelita came to Arlington, she was very isolated, although she did make friends, and that's who she depended on. Her friends completely supported her emotionally. Anytime that she needed to talk, they were there. They really loved Emelita.
They were very helpful in giving us information that this is not a normal situation. Emelita would have not left her son in any way just to go off. That was not her behavior or her character.
When 5 days pass with no word of Emelita, Detective Tommy Lenore is also assigned to the case.
Going into law enforcement initially, I didn't know if that was going to be my career choice. It's not a job, it's a lifestyle, it's my entire world.
The detective's main source of information is the woman who first reported Emelita's disappearance, her friend Mona Lisa.
Mona Lisa and Emelita Reeves were very good friends. They spent a lot of time together on the phone constantly. So when Mona Lisa had no contact with Emelita, then she became instantly worried that something had happened to her. Emelita had trusted Mona Lisa with secrets about her marriage.
Emelita is a mail order bride. Jack Reeves met her through a publication called Cherry Blossoms.
The women who were advertised in these magazines were trying to flee poverty and help their families. Emelita never loved Jack. It was strictly an arrangement that she made so that her parents would have financial stability that they needed.
After further questioning, Mona Lisa reveals an important secret to investigators.
Mona Lisa admitted that she and Emelita were having a relationship.
Because of the strains in her marriage, Emelita was reaching out for some kind of closeness. Mona Lisa was willing to meet those needs and be involved with her.
They must now consider what else Mona Lisa may be hiding about Emelita.
Everyone's a suspect, period. You don't ignore anyone. Someone is romantically involved with someone, especially if you have somewhat of a lover triangle. That is something we need to look at.
But detectives determine Mona Lisa has a solid alibi.
Mona Lisa was not present at the window of time that we believe Emelita was disappearing.
She was genuinely concerned about Emelita and her welfare. She seemed to be more of a witness instead of a suspect.
But Mona Lisa has an additional secret to share. Emelita is also having an affair with a man.
Tony is another member of the Asian community in Arlington.
Investigators learned that the night Emelita disappeared, she was supposed to meet Tony.
We were clued in that he may be involved in this. So we had to try to find out where Tony was.
Detective Evans tracks him down at his home for questioning.
He said she never showed up. She just never called, never communicated, and the meeting had never occurred.
Before Tony's story can be verified, police discover a critical piece of evidence.
They had found Emelita's vehicle abandoned at a hypermart. It was sitting there, just parked, abandoned, nobody around it. And so there's a lot of concern here as to who did she go meet with, or if she's being harmed, maybe someone's holding her against her will.
Investigators rush to the parking lot to search the abandoned vehicle.
Emelita's car was not locked. This was very unusual. Emelita always locked her car. Her son's car seat was taken out of the back. She always had it with her in case she had to take him somewhere. She was very protective of him.
Emelita was very small in stature, and she would have to have her driver's seat pushed up pretty close to the steering wheel to be able to reach the pedals with her feet. But in this case, this car was not set that way. This car seat was all the way back with the headrest back for a larger person.
Emelita could not have driven the car the way that it was found. She would not have gotten out of the car, pushed the seat all the way back as it was.
This is much more than just a regular missing person.
The detectives focus on who could have dumped Emelita's car.
There was a location across the street and down a little bit that Tony did work at. And so you had to consider that. He said, I didn't see her, I didn't talk to her. And yet he works at a location that's right across the street from where this car is found.
That in itself would establish Tony as a suspect.
When you have infidelity, you've added another person into the mix.
You have jealousy, you have rage, you have motives. All of these dynamics have to play into an investigator's mind as to what direction this investigation is going to take. Detectives interrogate Tony again, pushing hard for information.
When we explained to Tony that you are, in fact, a potential suspect, he wasn't happy.
He offered to take a polygraph examination, and he passed.
That gives credence to the fact that he may not be responsible for Emilita's disappearance.
Not only does the lie detector test put Tony in the clear, he offers up another potential suspect.
Tony believed that Jack was responsible. He and Emilita had talked. She was very unhappy with Jack and very afraid for her safety.
Evans and Lenore call Jack Reeves down to the station for a formal interview.
Jack is overly giving of information. We find out that he was married back in the 70s when he was in the military to a lady named Sharon Reeves. And he said, oh, she died of suicide. She died from a gunshot wound. So you go, really?
As the interview continues, Jack reveals that he met his next wife while stationed in South Korea as a sergeant in the U.S. Army.
Mayang was a very slight Asian girl. He had had at least a 2-year relationship with her while he was in Korea. He promised her a better life in the United States.
Jack tells us that he and Myung went fishing at Lake Whitney. While he was out looking for crickets or fishing bait, Myung was on a flotation device and had apparently fallen off that flotation device. Then she drowned in about 4 foot of water. The things that are coming together during this interview is just incredible.
For detectives, 2 dead wives and 1 missing wife raises all kinds of red flags. They call in medical examiner Dr. Jeffrey Barnard to investigate Sharon's suicide.
Being a forensic pathologist is like putting together a jigsaw puzzle because you take multiple pieces of information and ultimately you put them together to come up with as clear a picture as you can. We act as spokesmen for those persons who died, and so you want to give them a voice, and by giving them a voice, you want to be able to state what happened.
First, Dr. Barnard takes a hard look at Sharon Reeves' reported cause of death.
Ruling it suicide and not sending the body for an autopsy was not inconsistent with the way cases were handled in the 70s. They took the word of the husband and they went on with it.
But now that investigators have good reason to question Jack's version of events, they decide to re-examine the case.
It could be accident, it could be suicide, it could be homicide, or it could be undetermined. It may be painful for the family, but the truth is what you're seeking.
We got all these other women that he's involved with. Well, they're all dead.
He's either got the worst luck in the world, or this man is killing people.
The search is still underway for Jack Reeves' missing wife, Emilita. But the investigation has now expanded to include 2 of his former wives.
This case had become much bigger than we thought. It wasn't just about Emilita per se, although that was the goal and the focus was to find her. But there was a lot of things that Jack had said in that initial interview that needed to be followed up on. So when we find out about Sharon Reeves, Tommy basically tasked me find out what that's about.
Jack was just 21 years old in 1961 when he married Sharon.
Sharon was a very sweet person, very Christian, and Jack was the bad boy. He kind of swept her off her feet. Jack joined the service. He had a 25-year career in the service, and he ended up in Korea.
But Jack being deployed over 10,000 miles away takes a heavy toll on their marriage.
She had met someone that she fell in love with, and she decided that it was time to leave Jack. As soon as he got the divorce papers in Korea, he asked for an emergency leave, and he flew home immediately to confront Sharon. He said that he had come home and wanted to work things out. She was very conflicted, he said, over whether she should leave her marriage and leave the children. He said that Sharon was despondent and that she had committed suicide.
We don't have a lot of evidence on this topic, but it's not very common for a failed marriage to end in suicide. That's not a very common outcome.
Detective Evans makes a call to the police who originally investigated the death of Sharon Reeves years before.
I said, we are dealing with a missing person right now by the name of Emelita, and she is married to Jack Reed. We have learned that Sharon died from a suicide.
The police dig up the old report written when Sharon died and give it to Dr. Barnard.
This case started out with a justice of the peace just ruling it a suicide and not sending the body for an autopsy. We had Mr. Reeves' statement that they'd had intercourse, he went to a shower, and then he came out, and there she was dead.
Jack Reeves claimed that she sat on the edge of the bed and put the gun to her chest and pulled the trigger with her toe and shot herself in the chest and died.
Triggering with the toe, it's somewhat unusual. But, some people end up deciding to do something unusual because their thinking process at the time is not normal anyway.
On the toe that had been used to pull the trigger of the shotgun, the skin was cut.
In trying to determine if a scene is staged, you have to take a lot of things into account. One, what is the scene? And does the scene make sense for what it's being presented as? But I didn't have very much to work with.
They didn't have a crime scene unit at that time. They had a guy that would come out and take photographs when they had a crime scene. And so they had one photograph.
Ms. Reeves was on the bed, laid out on her back, and the shotgun was standing up between her legs as her legs dangled over the bed. That just didn't really add up to what I would expect. In a case like that, if you lean over and trigger the shotgun, if she's standing up, she's going to fall forward. She's not going to fall back like that. If she sat up and triggered the shotgun, the idea that the shotgun would just drop down and fall perfectly standing up straight also didn't make any sense.
Investigators meet with the team that originally worked on Sharon's case.
They took us into this huge conference room, and it was the chief, the former chief, the officers that were there back then, retired. Their attitude was, you know what, we screwed this up. And what are we going to do?
We all agreed that what's very important was to exhume the body and to conduct a second autopsy.
Dr. Barnard hopes that even after 16 years, Sharon's body will reveal new evidence.
The main focus was to determine what features you can identify about the wound. Could you determine range of fire? Were there satellite perforations, which clearly would take it away from being a contact wound? Was it the kind of wound that I had seen in a suicide shotgun to the trunk before?
In Texas, when somebody dies, we don't have to get permission from family members or anything else to exhume a body. So Jack is totally unaware that any of this is going on.
On December 14th, 1994, Sharon Reeves' sealed casket is transported to Dr. Barnard's morgue.
It was a long shot that her body would be intact. But it depended on a lot of things, depending on how much water had gotten into the ground, what sort of a coffin she was in.
She just may be soup. She may be totally, been floating in water. The body may be unexaminable.
With so much riding on the results, Detective Evans decides to observe the autopsy.
I never really stood in the room where there's dead bodies everywhere. It was quite sobering to see death in that way. When they opened up the casket, Sharon was like clay. Dr. Bernard was totally fascinated because that was something we could work with.
Although her body was covered in mold, she actually was more mummified. After we got the mold removed, she was in pretty good shape, and that's what allowed me to have more to examine.
Dr. Barnard focuses on the site of the gunshot wound.
When the shotgun is ignited, then you can have multiple projectiles. You can take the barrel tip out up to around maybe 3 feet. Then all the projectiles will enter into the body, and you'll have a single hole. As you pull further away, the projectiles start to satellite around the main entrance defect. At that point, you're talking about the barrel tip being several feet away from the body at the time of discharge.
Unmasking a murderer depends on the experienced eye of Dr. Barnard.
What can I tell about that firearm injury? That became the central question. If I found there were birdshot perforations that spread around the entrance wound, there was no question that was a homicide without any reserve.
But when Dr. Barnard looks for the perforated pattern to the wound, he can't find it. What he does uncover is signs that the funeral home may have obscured the wound as part of their preparation for burial.
They had certainly washed the body. I didn't see any obvious soot, so I couldn't tell whether this was a tight contact wound or if it was a loose contact wound that the funeral home had cleaned up. I couldn't come up to a conclusion, so I really wasn't convinced what the range of fire was.
With the wound pattern concealed, Dr. Barnard turns to another approach, studying the angle of the kill shot to the body.
If they're doing it themselves, it's a suicide. They're trying to make sure they're hitting significant organs like the head or the heart, something like that, and the trajectory is direct on. It could be sharply upward, it could be sharply downward, but it usually is straight on. This was certainly anything but that.
The investigation into the disappearance of Jack Reeves' wife, Emelita, has grown to include the death of his previous wife, Sharon. Dr. Barnard believes that determining the trajectory of the gunshot that killed her will help them prove if her death was suicide or murder.
I make a standard incision of the body, and then you identify where did the projectiles go. Is it going from the right side to the left side? Is it going up or down? You take the entrance area, and then you take the steel rod and you connect it, and you can really see the approach that the projectiles went. In this case, they went into the left side of her chest. And that was a fairly substantial angle. It was an unusual trajectory, I thought. Suicides, you don't typically see that.
To work out the exact details of how the gun was fired, investigators attempt a reconstruction.
I knew what things you would need and what measurements you would take. What is the distance from the armpit region down to the fingertips? What is it from the groin to the toes?
We found a young lady that worked with our department that had basically the same arms, lengths, foot size, everything. We found not the gun that was used, but one that was like that gun. Dr. Bernard, he would say, this is the way that the weapon would have to be held in order to get this wound track. If she held it that way, there was no way that she could reach that trigger and hold it in the trajectory. We took multiple photographs, we took videos, and we were able to show that that can't be done.
All of the information that we gathered from the reconstruction challenged a self-inflicted gunshot wound and supported the fact that Sharon Reeves was shot and killed by another person. But one of the real big questions in all of this was the cut to her toe.
The injury to the toe was a mark which I've still never seen from someone triggering a weapon. It curved opposite the direction that I felt that it would have curved if she had even triggered it with her toe. So it didn't make any sense. The fact that it survived 16 years also made me think this is a postmortem artifact. Someone had created that wound. This is a homicide.
With the puzzle pieces of Sharon's death finally coming together, investigators now fear the worst for missing wife Emelita. Her marriage to Jack has a chilling parallel with Sharon's.
Emelita had plans to divorce Jack. She had told her friends that he had agreed to a divorce. When Sharon had said that she was going to divorce him and served him with divorce papers, 2 weeks later, Sharon was dead. When Emelita told her friends that she was divorcing Jack and that she had told him, then Emelita disappeared.
One of the reasons why people kill is that they are financially motivated. They have something at stake. They look to inherit a person's finances. They might have a health insurance or life insurance policy that they're seeking to cash out on. These types of killings are very different from killings that are motivated in a fit of rage.
While the search for Emelita continues, investigators also examine the death of Jack's other wife, Myung, who died in 1986.
When Myung's body lay in the funeral home, her sister noticed bruises and scratches on Myung. Myung was deathly afraid of water. Whenever they would go to the beach together, she would never even go wading into the ocean. Her sister didn't believe that Myung accidentally drowned. She told Jack at that time that she wanted an autopsy done to find out exactly why she had died. He immediately had her cremated so that there was no possibility that an autopsy could be performed. It was impossible for authorities to build any kind of a case against Jack for Myung's death because there was no evidence. So they had to rule it an accidental death.
Even now, 8 years later, without a body, there is no way to reopen an investigation. But suspicion of Jack Reeves reaches a peak.
We know from what happened with Sharon's case and then Myung Hee's case, Jack's been doing this for many years, basically pulling the wool over everybody's eyes. If something happens and he don't like it, then he gets rid of them and he gets another one.
If somebody kills somebody and they find a sense of gratification from it and they find ease in doing it, they get cocky and they get confident. And if they haven't been caught the first time, they feel they won't be caught the second time.
This guy's never going to stop. This is who he is, and this is how he operates, unless somebody finally says this is enough.
Detectives Evans and Lenore vow to stop Jack and get justice for Sharon, Myung, and his missing wife, Emelita.
People loved and cared about her. She had a life here, and she had friends here. I take that very seriously, and I want to get some kind of resolution. I was contacting Jack's half-sister and husband to see what they knew.
When Jack hears that investigators are asking questions about his past wives, he charges into the station.
Jack showed up at the police department with new evidence Emelita was alive. He said that she was still sending money home to her parents in the Philippines, and he had proof that money had been taken out of the account and sent to her parents overseas.
Jack claimed, well, she's still spending money. She's still doing these things, all these things. So, in other words, she's still alive. She's still sending money.
A simple trip to the bank allows the detectives to trace the transfer.
And it actually was not her sending money, it's him sending money.
He wanted to manipulate us. He thought he was smart. He thought he was criminally sophisticated.
But Jack is so confident, he challenges the detectives to broaden the search.
He wanted me to come back out to the house because he wanted me to look for blood. That's when we started to turn the tables on him. I said, well, look, we'll come out and look at your house. I got no problem with that. Now, keep in mind, this was 1994. 1994 was right at the cutting edge of DNA. Very few people knew about DNA, myself included. But I told Jack, I'm going to go out and look at your carpet, but I'm not going to look for blood. I said, I'm going to use this new technology, DNA. I said, DNA is pretty remarkable. I said, once an individual dies, molecules from the body just die. And when they die, sometimes they're microscopic and they just leave and they flake off the body. I said, it's part of the process of decomposition. And I said, what that means is that if Emilita just died in your home, we're going to be able to find out because we're going to find her displaced DNA in that home. Can I come out and do that? Can I scope your carpet with that? He said, yeah, but not tonight. I said, sure. We set up a surveillance team on his house just to watch. The following morning, he had a crew out there that was removing parts of his carpet. I told Buddy, it's time now to clip this guy. We're not playing his games anymore.
Investigators make their move. They get a warrant to arrest Jack Reeves for murder.
Jack thinks that we're looking for Emilita. So when we get him arrested and we take him to the jail and the judge is standing before him and she reads out the charge and says that he is being arrested for the murder of Sharon Reeves, he just about falls out. He goes, what are you talking about? Sharon Reeves? I don't know what you're talking about.
As Jack Reeves is held for trial for the murder of his wife Sharon, investigators get unexpected news in Emilita's case.
If there was ever any evidence of divine intervention, this investigation was it. I got a call from the Texas Ranger that was assisting in our investigation. And he told me that near Lake Whitney, a body was found by some hunters in a shallow grave. And the body was that of a female. I didn't need to hear anything else. I knew it was Emilita.
Detectives and the medical examiner's team arrive at the site.
The body was buried in the shallow grave, and foxes, coyotes, those kinds of things had got to the body and picked it clean.
When bodies scattered by animals, it becomes much more challenging because you're trying to determine what is animal trauma, and sometimes that is very difficult.
They cordon off the scene and they take little brushes and finely brush the dust and the dirt away until they find every little minute piece of body that they can in order to put this body back together.
One piece of the skeleton gives police the answer they need.
We positively identify Emilita through dental records.
1 year after Emilita Reeves is reported missing, she is declared dead. Now, investigators need to prove it was murder.
The ultimate crime is taking a human life. I like to know that by making sure justice is served in some small way, we bring peace to those who have lost their loved ones.
An autopsy may be the only way to discover what really happened to Emilita.
There's no evidence of a gunshot wound. There's no evidence of stabbing, anything of that nature. If you don't have any other trauma to the body, none to the head, then you want to look to see if we have any evidence of strangulation.
In cases of strangulation, you can have fracture of the hyoid bone, and that's usually an indication of excessive force applied to the neck by the person committing the strangling. The hyoid bone is an arc or U-shaped bone high up in the neck, and it's attached to other structures in the neck.
In a skeletonized remain or in a decomposing case, looking for the hyoid bone can be fairly challenging, depending on how decomposed they are. If they're skeletonized, it's a very fragile bone.
When Emelita's remains were recovered, we didn't find the hyoid bone. So we just don't know exactly how Jack Reeves killed her.
Investigators worry Emelita's murder may never be solved until they learn of a possible witness.
Jack and Emelita had a son. He was 4 years of age at the time.
We had him in with some forensic interviews, the juvenile psychologist. He was doing some things, playing with dolls or making statements that she was concerned about, like mom and dad fighting, choking, bathroom, bathtub.
Detectives take the young boy out to Lake Whitney to see what he can remember.
This was not a camping area. This is off the road, off the beaten path. This was an area where people don't go. But he is familiar with the area. He just takes off and starts walking. He's not uncomfortable. He's not apprehensive. And he's walking towards the area where Emelita was at. He points out this hole before we even get to it to see it. He says, watch out for that hole over there. You wouldn't know that unless you were familiar with the area. I believe that he was there when this murder occurred. Most likely, Emelita was choked or drowned. And I believe that he was there when all this went on. When the grave was dug, when his mom was put there and left there.
As sad as it is, as incredibly evil as it is, that's the world of Jack Reeves. He's an irrational psychopath. But now we need to prove what we believe happened to Emelita.
As investigators close in on Jack Reeves for the murder of his wife Emelita, the trial for Sharon Reeves' murder begins. The case rests on Dr. Barnard's reconstruction of the shooting.
We had to prove in the demonstration that there was no way that Sharon could have reached that trigger if the gun was held in that position.
We brought out a model and take the model to show roughly where the entrance was and where the shotgun trajectory went.
That was all forensics, measurements, diagrams, drawings to convince a jury that this couldn't have happened this way.
Dr. Barnard's word proved that it was not possible for her to have had a self-inflicted gunshot wound.
The jury announces their verdict.
Jack was found guilty of murder, of homicide. He got 35 years for sure. Her family was just ecstatic, at a point of tears, were crying because they had believed that this had occurred way back then. So it was extremely satisfying and emotional.
But investigators fear this one sentence isn't enough.
With 35 years, there was a possibility that he could have gotten out in 7. This was a big concern. He would be able to have another victim.
Police want to put Jack away for good. They have no way to charge him for Myung's suspicious death. Their one hope is to trace the clue given by Jack and Emelita's son about the fight in the bathroom.
It raises our attention because what it kind of shows is that Dad had done something to Mom that was in a violent way, in the bathtub, and you think, well, maybe it could have been drowning, maybe it could have been choking.
Investigators believe there may be a way to scientifically determine that Emelita was drowned. They decide to search her grave for particular traces of water.
Diatoms are found in water, and there were diatoms found close to where her torso was, and in the area where her torso is also going to be where her lungs were.
The diatoms in the lake near her body do not match the diatoms that were found in her lungs. Therefore, the diatoms that were found in her body came from a body of water somewhere else.
If you take into account water enters the airway, they're no longer able to exchange oxygen. So the brain doesn't get oxygen, and ultimately they die from it. Certainly when you're struggling, that it would be a very horrifying way to die.
Based on information that was given to us, and based on our analogy of how Emelita died, we believed that Jack killed her in the bathtub of his home.
Jack Reeves is charged with the murder of his wife, Emelita, and for the second time in a year, stands before a jury.
Which a jury heard that child had been taken to the scene, saw his mother be buried out there all alone like a dog. Their countenance was like, oh my God, how dare you? There was no way you're going to get away with that.
Jack Reeves is convicted and sentenced to 99 years in prison.
We were very satisfied when this happened. Doesn't bring Emelita back, so there's nothing happy, but it was just a feeling of relief. Look at the timeline with this man. Every 4 or 5 or 6 years, a woman is killed. You do the math. How many lives we've saved by getting him and putting him in prison? I think that really affects me more than anything.
We couldn't have done it without the science. We couldn't have done it without the forensics.
I think what it taught me was don't ever make an assumption that you cannot come up with an answer. A body can be buried for many years, and you can still get evidence, and you can still draw conclusions. You can speak for the dead.